All right, let's talk about aging. For pretty much all of human history, it's been a one-way street, right? But what if it isn't? What if we could not only live longer, but actually live better? Because, we're staring down the barrel of two very, very different futures for what it means to grow old. So, on one side, you've got this future called the long decline. For decades, the big fear was that adding more years to our lives would just mean adding more years of sickness and misery. Gerontologists even had this super depressing name for it, the failures of success. But what if we could flip that script completely? What if we could have the other future? More years, but with less misery. A future where we literally squeeze all our sick years into the shortest possible time. Now, this idea, this hopeful vision, wasn't just some wishful thinking. It was a real scientific hypothesis that totally changed the conversation around aging. Okay, let's dive into this. Back in 1980, a researcher named James Fries came up with this absolute game changer of a concept, the compression of morbidity. The idea is actually pretty simple, but it is so profound. Think of all the sickness in your life as a triangle. Now, instead of that triangle just getting longer and wider as we live longer, what if we could delay when it starts way more than we delay when we die? You'd basically squeeze that whole period of illness into a much smaller, more compact chunk of your life. It's a fantastic theory for sure, but you gotta ask, is there any proof? Does it actually work in the real world? Well, over the last 30 years or so, researchers have put this idea to the test in some major long-term studies, and honestly, the results are pretty stunning. So, one landmark study followed a group of older runners and a control group of non-runners for 21 years, and they came up with this number, 12.6 years. That is how much longer the runners were able to postpone the start of any major disability compared to their less active peers. We're talking more than a decade of extra healthy, functional living. Just think about that. And what's so cool about this data is that it shows the runners didn't just live a little bit longer, their health span was dramatically extended. The beginning of their disability was pushed back way more than their death was. So this isn't just a theory anymore. This is real proof that healthy lifestyles can, in fact, compress morbidity. Okay, so squeezing sickness is one thing. That's incredible. But what if we could go even further? Not just adding some healthy years, but adding, say, decades, or maybe even centuries? Yeah, this is where things start to get really mind-bending. Way out in the future, we might be looking at two wild scenarios. The first is decelerated senescence. This is where we figure out how to slow the whole biological aging process way, way down, maybe pushing the max lifespan to something like 140. But then there's arrested senescence, a world where we don't just slow aging down, we stop it, or maybe even reverse it. In that scenario, you wouldn't die from old age anymore. You'd only die from things like accidents or war, meaning you could potentially live for thousands of years. I know, it sounds like pure science fiction. But, well, proponents like the biogerontologist Aubrey de Grey argue that aging is really just an engineering problem. He's identified what he calls the 7 deadly things, all this damage that builds up in our bodies over time. And his argument is, if we can develop therapies to fix each one of these things, kind of like a regular maintenance schedule for the human body, we could get to a state he calls negligible senescence. But all of this pushes us past the scientific how do we do it, and right into the much deeper human question of why. I mean, if we could live for centuries, what would even be the point? Would life still have any meaning? And that right there is the central philosophical challenge. There was this critic of life extension, Hans Jonas, who argued that having a non-negotiable limit to our expected time is necessary for each of us as the incentive to make them count. So, does having a deadline, a finish line, give our lives purpose? Or would having more time just mean having more opportunities to find it? One way to tackle this is with a framework from the psychologist Roy Baumeister. He said a meaningful life isn't just one big thing, it's about meeting 4 core human needs. You need purpose, goals you're working toward. You need moral worth, a feeling that you're a good person. You need efficacy, the belief that you can actually make a difference. And you need self-worth, a solid reason to respect yourself. This kind of reframes the whole question, doesn't it? It's not just would a 500-year life be meaningful, but could a 500-year life still fulfill these fundamental human needs? And that brings us to what is maybe the most urgent question of all. Because even if we solve the science and we figure out the philosophy, we are left with a massive ethical problem. If and when these technologies get developed, who is actually going to get them? Let's be really clear here. Massive inequality in how long people live isn't some futuristic problem. It is happening right now. This quote, based on the work of health researcher Michael Marmot, is just staggering. A 20-year difference in life expectancy over just 14 miles. That's the gap between poor Black neighborhoods and wealthy white ones. This has nothing to do with genes, it's all about social status, your environment, and your access to resources.
And this quote just brilliantly illustrates the ethical crossroads we're standing at. The bioethicist Walter Glannon frames the debate perfectly. Do we pour all our resources into giving people who already have long, healthy lives even more time? Or do we have a moral obligation to first fix the injustices that are robbing people of the years they should already have? And what this all suggests is that the most powerful form of life extension that's available to us right now has nothing to do with futuristic tech or miracle cures. It's about creating a more just and a more equal world. It's about making sure that where you happen to live doesn't determine when you die. So this is where we're left. The science of aging is moving faster than ever. We've proven we can squeeze sickness, and we're starting to seriously dream about stopping aging altogether. But you know what? The science is the easy part. The real challenge is a human one, making sure that as we get a longer life, we're also building a more meaningful and a more just life for every single one of us.